Managing Exchange 2010 with Windows PowerShell. You can almost think of this final nugget as being kind of redundant with some of the topics that we've talked about throughout this entire series. But it's important to take what we've learned associated with the management of Exchange 2010 and really consolidate it into a single item of learning. Whether you're taking the test or not, when you move to Exchange 2010, you'll find that your management techniques, the tactics you use to go through your daily management, are inevitably going to be forced into using Windows PowerShell at the command line. Now, the reason for this, as we've discussed before, is that all of Exchange 2010 really functions with Windows PowerShell. The Exchange Management Console itself is simply a graphical user interface that layers on top of Windows PowerShell. That being said, whenever you're going through all of those management tactics, you can be assured that everything you do inside of the Exchange Management Console really just runs a PowerShell command under the covers. And as we also have already learned, a number of these commands are simply not exposed to the level of the Exchange Management Console. So you're going to have to use that console, you're going to have to use the PowerShell to actually do some of those commands. Now, in this nugget, we want to talk about some of the interesting things you've got to be aware of when you're doing Windows PowerShell and when you're doing management with Windows PowerShell. First and foremost is the fact that Exchange PowerShell always uses remote connections. Even when you're connecting on the same server, as we've been doing throughout this entire series, to Exchange PowerShell, it's doing so using a technique called implicit remoting that effectively brings those commands down to the local PowerShell session. What's interesting about this is that in another computer outside of your environment, you can leverage Windows PowerShell on that computer to do the same sorts of Exchange PowerShell command type management from that other computer. And I'll show you how to do that. Inside of the Exchange Management Shell is also an element that helps you determine which server you want to use for that remote PowerShell. In this nugget, I'll show you where you can configure that as well. Then I also want to spend a little bit of time talking about some of the commandlets of note. If there could be a set of commandlets that you probably should be at least familiar with, that will be this list of commandlets of note. These are the ones that you will probably find yourself using more regularly than others, and also ones that, who knows, may be tested on you whenever you take that exam. Also, be aware that there are a number of PowerShell scripts of note as well. These are installed at the Exchange server /v14/scripts location. In this location are a number of PowerShell scripts, which are multiple commandlets that run together to complete some task. And because these scripts are designed by Microsoft, you may find that they provide some additional functionality over and above what you can build on your own. Lastly, I want to talk about the PowerShell command log and how you can start logging of PowerShell commands as a mechanism to identify what commands are being run against your organization. But first, let's talk about Exchange PowerShell and Exchange PowerShell's use of remote connections. We've talked before about how you can use Windows PowerShell here in the Exchange Management Shell. I can run get mailbox, for example, or any of the commands and be assured that that command is going to function. But what if I don't want to be on an Exchange server? What if I don't want to have to RDP to the server or walk into the server room to actually accomplish these commands? I can do so from another desktop. For example, this Windows 7 desktop that I've logged into as administrator. If I want, I can bring forward Windows PowerShell, and launch it here inside of this Windows 7 desktop. Now, there are a couple of interesting commands that you need to be aware of in order to be able to do this. And again, this is the technique referred to as implicit remoting. The first thing we need to do is create a session object. So we do $session equals new PS session, configuration name, Microsoft.exchange, connection URI, http://, and then the name of the server that you want to connect to, which in our case will be ex1nugget.nuggetlab.com/PowerShell, and then authentication Kerberos. This actually is going to create that session object. Now at this point we can't actually do get mailbox because those commands don't exist on this Windows 7 computer. The next thing we have to do with the session object to be able to use these commands is to actually import the session. Import-ps session $session. This will complete the implicit remoting connection and import in that session. You'll see here we're creating the implicit remoting module. And when we're complete, we'll be able to use those commands just like we were on that Exchange server. You'll notice here we get a warning that some of the imported command names may include unapproved verbs, which might make them less discoverable. But if you're aware of what the commands are, you can make use of those commands here. Let's try get mailbox now. Check it out. We can actually get all of the mailboxes off of that remote Exchange server. It is through this process of implicit remoting that you can, from more or less any PowerShell-enabled desktop, be able to work with your Exchange organization without the need for having that Exchange management console lying around. This is a great solution if you want to make sure that you can have the ability to manage your Exchange organization from really anywhere in your environment. So creating this session object is great because within the session object creation language, I can identify which of the servers I want to connect to. But what if I'm actually on my Exchange server? What if I'm connected into that Exchange server and maybe I want to use PowerShell against a different server? You notice here I'm connected into Exchange 2010, the organizational health screen. If I right-click on this Microsoft Exchange on-premises and choose Properties, you'll notice that here under the General tab I have an ability to select a server to connect to for remote PowerShell. I can specify that server, the one that I've been connecting to this entire period, or I can connect to the automatically selected server if I want. This gives you the ability to change which server that you're actually connecting to complete those remote PowerShell commands. Speaking of those commands, really what are the list of commands that you need to be aware of when you're taking a look at furthering your knowledge associated with Exchange and PowerShell, and also in preparing for that exam? There are a set of commands that you will find that you just use regularly. And I've listed a few of these up here that you might want to take a look at. You'll notice here that I've aligned them by the nouns associated with these commands. So when it comes to mailboxes, the get, set, and restore verbs come in handy for getting those mailboxes, setting parameters, and restoring those mailboxes whenever you experience a problem. Mailbox statistics, store use statistics, and mailbox folder statistics here can also be handy for helping you understand some of the mailbox information, some of the use of storage, and then also some of the mailbox folder information associated with your mailbox server role. You can get and set specific Exchange server configurations using the Exchange server noun. Same thing with email address policy for those email addresses, or databases and database paths here with get, set, and move. AD sites and AD site links can also be manipulated and viewed using get AD site and get AD site link. Or you can work with your database availability groups here using the get and set commands as well. Sometimes you need to do database copies, and you can set mailbox database copies, get them, or even update those database copies using these commands. The address list command you may find that you use quite a bit because you can get, set, and create new address lists again from the command line. Same thing goes for mailbox move requests here with the get, set, and new move request commandlets. And then finally down here is the ability to test mail flow, ActiveSync connectivity, OAuth connectivity, Outlook web services, and even Edge synchronization. All of these present a good starting point for the list of commandlets that you should keep inside of your brain for use whenever you're managing your environment. Now you may be thinking to yourself, this seems like a lot of commands that I have to remember. It's not like the old DOS days where if I knew CD and dir and copy and delete, that's really all I needed to know. These are a lot of things I have to memorize. Well, don't forget that PowerShell includes a number of discoverability features to help you find what sorts of commandlets you might be interested in. The get command will help you identify all of the different commands that are available for you to take a look at. Now you'll see the number of those commands just scroll through very quickly, so you can understand that, well, there's a lot of commands that are available. But remember that these commands are all the commands that are available for you, notwithstanding the Exchange commands. One of the other commands that you may want to be available, or maybe want to be aware of, to help you discover more of these commands that can be useful in managing your Exchange organization is get command and then piping that to where. And then using where objects constraint capability to look for where the command name is like, for example, let's use mailbox. This will give us a list of the commands which include the word mailbox. You'll see here now I can just look at those commands that have to do with managing my mailboxes in my Exchange organization. So never fear those discoverability features in with PowerShell. PowerShell also provides get help for any of the commands that are available. You can do get help, set mailbox, and discover all of the information that you need to know about setting that mailbox. And this get help command sometimes takes a minute or two for it to bring up all the help information. But again, what this provides is the capability for you to understand what the syntax is going to be for each of the commands that you're going to be using in your environment. Now, if you're like me, this syntax can be somewhat challenging. You'll see here there is a significant amount of syntax associated with setting mailbox parameters. And mainly, a lot of this syntax, at least in the case of this command, have to do with all the different things, the attributes that are associated with a mailbox. One of the things you might also want to do is get help set mailbox -examples, which will provide you a list of common examples associated with the use of that command. This commandlet with examples really can help you spin up your use of Windows PowerShell very quickly. For those commands that are sometimes a little more challenging or more difficult to be able to create on your own, Microsoft has created a set of PowerShell scripts that you should probably be aware of. These scripts consolidate a number of different commandlets together to accomplish some task. If you go to the C Program Files, Microsoft, Exchange Server, v14 scripts location, you'll see this list of commands that have been created. There are a number of them here that we've actually worked with before. Let's take a look at Install Anti-Spam Agents. If I double-click this command, it brings it up in Notepad, and you can see here the structure of this command. It's doing some very advanced things, such as creating functions and then running them, and running if-then statements, to actually accomplish some sort of task. You may want to be aware of what these commands are, and generally what they can do, because they may be able to help you in certain circumstances. Now again, running these commands is important, but sometimes it can be difficult for you to truly understand what's going on whenever you make a change inside of the Exchange Management Console, and how you can translate that into a specific commandlet or a specific set of commandlets to actually accomplish something in the Exchange Management Shell. Let me actually show you a way that you can highlight some of the ways that the Exchange Management Console and the Exchange Management Shell work with each other. That is making use of, up here under the View command, viewing the Exchange Management Shell command log. You'll see here that by default it's empty. What you also have to do is click here under Action to start command logging. What this does is it provides a location for every single thing that occurs inside of the Exchange Management Console to be logged by command here inside of the log. Let's take a look here. Maybe we'll flip through and take a look at a mailbox. If we click here on mailbox, we're going to enumerate some information here in order to get that mailbox. This will probably show up here as a set of commands in the Exchange Management Shell command log. In order for us to simply click on this one link inside of the Exchange Management Console, we need to run 4 commands: get mailbox database, public folder database, and then 2 more commandlets here associated with mailbox database and mailbox database copy status. Clicking on any of these links up here on the top brings out more information here on the bottom associated with what that commandlet did. This little tool provides an excellent way for you to log how people are making use of the Exchange Management Console, and also to help you translate the things that you're doing inside of the console with the things you can be doing inside of the shell. So what have we talked about in this nugget? We've really talked about all of the different pieces that you need to be aware of associated with managing Exchange 2010 with Windows PowerShell. We talked about how Exchange PowerShell always uses those remote connections, whether you're on the Exchange server or if you're somewhere else in your environment using the tactic called implicit remoting. We talked about how you can select a server for remote PowerShell. We also talked about some of those PowerShell commandlets of note and PowerShell scripts of note that you should be aware of. And finally, we concluded with a look at the PowerShell command log, a useful tool for helping you translate between what you see in the Exchange Management Console and then what you can do in the Exchange Management Shell. This really brings us to the conclusion of this series. This entire 20 series, as we said in the beginning, is designed to help you understand what you need to know to be successful with Microsoft Exchange. Planning it, implementing it, configuring it, rolling it out, and then ultimately managing it and maintaining it over time. We've spent time talking about installing your first Exchange server. We talked about the mailbox server role and the client access server role. We moved into the hub transport and edge transport role, and then concluded with some of these management topics that will help you again be successful with working with that Exchange organization once it's up and running. Once again, my name is Greg Shields, and it's been a real pleasure working with you over this entire series of nuggets to help enlighten and educate you on what you need to know to pass that exam 70-662, and also how to be successful with your own Exchange Server 2010 organization. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.